Hello again, it's Ben with Studio on the Lake. Hey, so this is one I've been wanting to do for a while, and it has to do with burrs and bits, depending on how you look at it. Burrs and bits, specifically power carving, and they call this actually micro power carving as you get into the smaller stuff. So, obviously, you would have to have a power carver. There's the whole gamut out there, and I've done a video on those. This is my Oz Elite. It's 700, 800 bucks. It's my primary one, and then I use an iCube, which I'm looking at now. You can get for 175, 200 bucks, because I like to run 1/8-inch burrs and 3/32 burrs in there, and I'll talk a lot more about that as we go on here. But this is a power carving primer for bits, and I'll try to run all the way through it. So you can see there I've written down Saber Tooth, Cutsall, and Fordham, and there's a few others. The Dremel should be on there, probably as the rest of them. I use Saber and Cutsall. I do not use Fordham's, and I'll talk more about that as we get further down the line. And I'm going to set up here pretty much what I do use. Now, I do get stuff, not necessarily from eBay anymore because Amazon's too easy. I'll get a set of diamond burrs for 12, 15 bucks, 10 bucks, and that's what's sitting in the left-hand corner of that stump there. But they're $10 or $12, and out of those I'll be able to use maybe 3 of them. The quality is really poor. The shafts are typically 3/32 on the ones that I buy, and a couple of those shafts are too big to go in the 3/32, and a couple of them are too loose. So you can see, I don't know how many are in there, 12, 15. And they work fine. They've got a diamond coating on them, but they tend to wear out pretty quick, and they're inconsistent in quality, but you can't beat the price. So for the finer duty carving, those will work fine. Yeah, that's enough about that. So if they're 12, 15 bucks, it's kind of hard to go wrong with those in a lot of cases. I use 1/8-inch shafts. I do not use the 1/4-inch shafts, but I do use the 3/32. So I use the 1/8-inch and 3/32, and I do not use the 1/4. The 1/4-inch is better used in, Jordy can use them in his Fordham Dremel 4000, and then a lot of people will use the bigger burrs in the auto body, what the heck you call them? The bigger, it'll come to me at some point. The bigger hand pieces that primarily were developed for auto body. All right, so the 2 seconds, you can see the difference there. On the left is the 1/8 inch, and on the right is the 3/32. The reason I run both of them is some bits are not available in different sizes, and they're random. You'd hurt your head trying to figure it out. So there's the RAM, iCube RAM, and that's got, like I said, an 1/8-inch collet in it, and then on the right is the Elite, the Oz Elite, and that's got a 3/32. The one on the left it says it runs at 45,000 RPM. I typically run it wide open at 40, unless I've got a cutoff wheel or something in there. And the one on the right will run to 50,000 RPM, and I very rarely go to 50. 40 works fine. When you hit 40 on that Oz Elite on the right, you have to push a button to go higher. And I'm going to show you something interesting that I was not aware of in 15, 20 years of using Saber Tooth burrs. They have a speed restriction on them. They say not safe above 24,000, and I've ran them for years above that. I don't typically wear eye protection. Now, these are Cutsalls, and these are 2 1/8-inch Cutsalls. They're a medium, and the one on the left is a gold, and we'll talk a little bit more about Cutsalls as we go through here. I've got an issue with Cutsalls here lately. Jordy likes the extreme Cutsalls. You'll see that towards the end of this video if you stick around where I run through the bits, and I recommend you do that because it'll give you a one over the world. But those are the 2 that I used to use primarily all the time. The gold on the left is a little bit finer cut, and it has a gold shank on the end so you can tell the difference, and the one on the right is the silver. The last 5 or 6 of these that I have bought have vibration issues. And I know it's not my collets, and I know it's not the tool, because every other bit runs in there just fine. It's just those sabers. And so I'm going to give them a little time off and see if maybe the COVID didn't do it. Now here's a Collet Reducer. So this is a 1/8 inch to a 3/32. So if you have one power carver, the collets are a pain in the butt to change. You have to take out a wrench, change the tip on there, and I'm not going to show you that here. But here in the 1/8 inch, the 3/32 bit goes inside that sleeve, and voila, you can get away with one micro carver. My problem is, as you can see, it slips onto a shaft. I end up losing it. It sits down in the shaft, the burr holders. I've got holes drilled on the right, and I'll lose it. So there's the IQ, like I said, 175, 200. I like it. It's fine. Haven't got a whole lot of issues with it yet. It seems to do the trick. $200 is about the entry level for something of semi-quality. And there's my Oz Elite. I really do like that, other than the fact that it does tend to get a little warm after half an hour of abuse. But that's a professional one, and that'll set you back $700 to $800. So you'll need one of those, or you can use a Dremel. You could actually get into this with a $30 Dremel and the collets that go with that. So like I said, I hate changing collets back and forth. So I run the two hand pieces and I run them side by side. They sit up there on my bench, and they've been that way for years. 1/8 inch in the darker blue, which is the Ram, and then that thinner one, which you'll get if you start running the Burrs. You'll get to be able to spot those, kind of like a mechanic can spot the size of a wrench. So again, there's that Collet. They're hard to find. It's a reducer collet is what it's called. And I recommend, if you are running just a single, that you have probably two of them as a backup, because you'll be real pleased to know that you've got a secondary one around. So getting that, it's got the lineup going on the stump there. Again, we're starting off with the Cutsalls. I used to use these exclusively on my initial rough out work, and I've kind of gotten away from that because there's a quality issue, and I'll talk about that towards the end. So the second bits that I've used are Saber Tooth, and some people like Saber Tooth, some people like Cutsall, others like Fordham, etc. These are old Saber Tooth Burrs, and they used to have color on them. Saber Tooth runs white, yellow, green, and I think a red. But they graduate up in coarseness, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. I still ordered 4 or 5 new bits from Saber, and they sent me these neat little stickers to put on something. I don't have stickers. I don't have a place to put the stickers. I might start putting them around on a studio, kind of like Jordy Johnson does over at Carving Fusion. If you haven't checked him out, check out Jordy Johnson at Carving Fusion. Just Carve Rob, Ryan Cook, Uncle Kevin. Look down in the links down there, and you'll see a lot of those guys that I follow, and we trade back and forth. So Saber Tooth gives you what it is: extra fine white, max RPM. That's what's interesting, 2,400. That thing there I run that at 40, and I run that bigger one at 40 and sometimes 50. And then it says, obviously, the lawyers got involved, says wear eye protection. So if you're using on these on anything other than wood, or you've got a chance to tag them, you probably would not be in a bad shape to put some eye protection on. I don't. I'm lazy. But here's the ones that I got in the order, and kind of gave me an idea to do this one over the world. So white is a relatively new one, and it's extra fine. Now, interestingly enough, the white only came in the larger shaft size, which would be 1/8 inch, which was kind of strange to me. I would have thought the finer it was that they would allow those to run in the 3/32. But that's the white, that's the finest. And there's not a whole lot of difference between these. The difference is how hard you have to press on them. If you've got a really coarse one, it tends to vibrate a little bit more. It tends to jump around. And it's a little bit more aggressive, and it leaves a rougher surface. Now, yellow is the next step up, and that's called fine. The white is extra fine. And then you see the green one there. And it also says 2400 RPM. Now, I'm not sponsored by any of these folks. I have a Cutsall link down below. I'm going to take that out since I've been saying bad things about them. You get 5%. They'd give that to a lot of us. But there's the three, and I've got them out of order there. You can see the white should be on the left, being the finest, and then the yellow, and then the green. And then I'll give you a little demonstration real quickly of those. And you'll be hard-pressed to see the difference in those. Those are kind of like the Cutsall Extremes with a little bit of more of a burr on the end of them. And if you stick around the end of this video, I think it's 20 minutes, and I highly recommend you do that. That's what they look like after you've abused them. That's a ball nose on the right, and then it's one of those weird wacky shapes on the left. And I believe those were yellow at one time. But eventually you wear the paint off of them. I used the Sabers because they have better shapes for a lot of the smaller stuff that I do. But I like the Cutsalls better in a past life, and now I've switched. I'm more of a Saber fan. I love these balls. This is a yellow, which would be a medium grit, and it's a ball. With that taper, I can only go in one direction. With the ball, I can go in any direction. These are ceramic cut stones or ceramic stones, and I use these for bird burning. If you're not subscribed or if you're interested, look in there. Look at the channel. And if it intrigues you, subscribe. But you'll see that I do some stoning on bird feathers and detail work for fur. And these are what I use. And these are all grungy because they tend to start to burn after a while. So there's a whole setup sitting on the stump there. You got Cutsalls up on or diamonds up in the corner there, the cheap ones. Cutsalls, Sabers, and then you got the ceramics. The only thing that's missing in that is the last set of burrs that I use, and these are primarily this video is primarily the stuff that I use, and then some stuff I don't use, and I'll tell you why. But the last thing will be in there will be the ruby and the sapphire. So we're sitting on here, and that is a Cutsall. It's one of the ones that actually was working, and this one even has a little bit of a vibration to it. Has an 1/8 inch shaft, and that's usually the shaft size I would buy in the Cutsalls. And I cut that stuff in the top there. So remember I said the fine Saber burr here, this taper. The difference between the taper and the ball, the taper I've kind of got to go in a direction. You got to cut with that, and then the ball I can go in any direction. But I'm just kind of whacking out a really quick circle here, and I'm running kind of heavy-handed. And I don't have the dust collector going because that's supposed to be delivered next Tuesday. I'm still back down in Iowa, so I'm trying to show you how smooth this is, and it's not a real good demonstration until a little bit further in here. So I did a cross cut on there. So that's not bad. That cuts real nice. I'm not using a whole lot of effort on that. With the if you're using a lighter grit, you have to press harder and put a little more effort into it. But then when you get up into the yellow and the greens and the Cutsall mediums, they tend to grab and jump a little bit more than the others, so you have to be paying a little bit more attention to what you're doing. So we went up to a medium Saber. It's the exact same taper. I switched over to the other microcarver, which is the Elite. And you can see, and that is basswood that I'm using. That's just a scrap piece of basswood that I'm abusing. And you can see it. It looks a lot the same, and they really kind of are to some degree. But if you're staring at these and doing fine detail work, you'll really notice the difference from the white to the green. So here's the green, and this is the coarse. Saber doesn't. They do make a series of extremes, but I didn't put any of those in there. Like I said, I don't use the extremes. If you want to see, Jordy Johnson does. He doesn't use Sabers. He likes Cutsall extremes, but he's got a little bit more powerful setup, and he uses Dremel 4000, and then Ryan Cook and those guys use a micro. Oh man, I said I was going to have it, a die grinder, basically, either electric or whatever, and you can use 1/4 inch bits and up. and have a ½ inch of stuff sticking out on the end of that. And at that point, you probably ought to put some eye protection on. So the last thing that I use are the sapphires and the rubies. And I won't tell you where I got the sapphires and the rubies from. The company, I was kind of disappointed in them. They sent me an email that said, send me your email list. We looked up your channel, and we like what you're doing on the channel. Why don't you send us your list of and emails for all of your subscribers, and then we'll offer them a deal. And I thought, well, isn't that special? So I wrote back and said, why don't you give me a sponsorship, and then I'll talk about your folks on the channel, since I actually used the bits. And they didn't talk to me after that. So why the hell would I give them the name of people? That's ridiculous. Anyway, so the one on the left is a ruby. You can see it's got a pretty little pink color, and the one on the right is a sapphire. Quite honestly, I don't notice the difference between the two of these. I do notice the difference between the diamonds, or any diamond bits, even the more expensive ones, and the ruby and the sapphire. The rubies and the sapphires are heads above. So there's the three that I would use. I use a kind of a ball, and then the little, and the other ones are tapers. There's the cheap diamond bits you can get from anywhere. You can't go wrong. Those are the primary four that I use there. You can see that the two are smaller. One's a bigger bud taper. I forget they call that a bud or a taper, and then I use a round. So some folks say, hey, I use Fordham and Dremel, man. What's up with that? Well, I don't have anything to say about that other than they're not designed for carving. So here's a really nice Fordham set. It's got everything you can see in there. There's stones in the front, sanders on the back. They got carbide cutters. We'll talk about carbide in a minute. They've even got some ones that look like the Cutsalls up there in the blue. And, of course, everything under the sun from polishing. So if you're doing that, that's what they're for. I've never had any good luck with them for carving. Now, ceramic cut, I do use these. I use these for stoning, and typically I would use the second one from the left there, or one of the next two, because I use the tip and the edge for stoning. And that's the only place I can really find these for stoning. These are the carbides or the steel cutters, and this is a Dremel, and you can get them right at any hardware store. I don't use these, and the reason I don't is they don't cut well. They wear out fast, and then they burn. They look sexy because they've got these cool grinds on them, but I just have not found a Dremel bit that was worth it, although they're only $5, $7, $8. Now, Dremel does have this wood carving line out, and they even have beautiful pictures of people carving with them, their little spear points and whatnot. And Jordy has used a few of these, I think, and they come in a set like this. I might get a set to try them out, but by and large, I'm not a big fan of the carbide. And I don't use the Dremel or the Fordham, although you can get the stuff about there. Now, we talked about Cutsaw burrs. I think there's something wrong with their quality lately, or I've been unlucky. This used to be my favorite burr in the world. That's a Cutsaw medium, and it's a flame. And I used to order these by the dozen. The last 5 or 6 I've got are out of balance. I also use the little Cutsaw balls because I can go in any direction. And the balls seem to be fine. It's just the flames. And I can tell you how frustrating it is to pay $15, $18 for a bit and then stick it in brand new and have it vibrate. Now, there's a Cutsaw Extreme. Go over and check out Jordy Johnson at Carving Fusion. Jordy uses these because it removes wood. Now, Jordy's got a heavy hand. I've got a little lighter hand, and these things really take abuse. This was interesting. I found it just looking up stuff. For $850, you can buy this master set of carbide tungsten bits, and I forget who made them, but that's only $800 for those. I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. This came from Walmart, and it was relatively cheap, $10 or $12. Again, I don't think I'd use those, although you can't go wrong for that kind of money. So if you want to come up with something smaller, like the little birds that I carve and that sort of thing, that setup that I just showed you is the setup that I use. And that's a kind of a one over the world. So Saber, a couple Cutsaws in there, some sapphire, ruby bits, and then some cheap diamond bits, all in 1/8 and 3/32. And that's a one over the world. Wood carving, power carving burrs. It's a primer. If you got questions, leave me a comment down there, and I'll get back to you. Hey, thanks a lot. This has been Ben with Studio on the Lake.